Santa's Other Workshop by Killa Hawk 1. Perpetual darkness lingered at the top of the world. Thick ice, frigid air, and snow covered the lifeless perpetual mountainscape. However, the endless night did not go unchallenged. A single source of light illuminated the sky and drove back the darkness. Nestled between two snow-covered mountains, a little cottage sat with puffy, billowing smoke rising out of the chimney. Ignoring the fact that the nearest civilization was thousands of miles away, to the casual eye, the house was simply warm and welcoming. Still, one might ask themselves, what an odd thing to find in such a bleak place. How could such a thing come to be? Like most things found in the North Pole, not everything is as it appears. The land was unforgiving and cruel. It could take your life within minutes. Only a select number of creatures were given permission to live in this harsh and relentless wilderness. All others who entered this domain did it of their own accord, such as the residents of this tiny little home. However, these individuals were not like the others. With a little bit of magic at their disposal, they lived happy and joyful lives. At first glance, it would appear that it's nothing more than a simple, ordinary home inhabited by an elderly couple who loved each other dearly. If this was your only conclusion, you'd have been mistaken. In reality, a magical secret existed below, for the small house was much more than meets the eye. The little house was not just a home, but the tip of a mystical workshop hidden beneath the ice. For centuries, children around the world found joy from the efforts of this little hidden workshop. All year round, tiny magical hands toiled and labored to create toys and playful things for all the good children of the world. Elves, the last of the magical creatures of old, dwelt within its walls and used their mystical nature to create wondrous and joyful things for Christmas morning. 3 days after the winter solstice, the old man would put on his heavy coats and boots, take to the air, and deliver his Christmas joy to every last child. Like everything in the cosmos, there must be balance. For every night, there must be day. Every beginning has an end. With every good child, there was a naughty boy or girl to be found. Far below the bright lights, singing, and happy elves creating and building new and fantastic toys, there's another workshop. There, the warmth of the hearth could not reach. While the purpose of the upper workshop is to bring happiness, the other was dark and sterile. It too had a purpose. It was here where the masses of cheap and easily broken toys were made. There was no love put into these objects. A child's eyes would never brighten with wonder and awe upon seeing them on Christmas morning. In his wisdom, the old man knew that every naughty child should not be forgotten during this time of goodwill. However, the old man was no fool, and had no desire to waste his resources on such unsatisfying tasks. This responsibility was handed to the banished and exiled elves that inhabited the deepest bowels of the workshop. Those were the selfish hearts and greedy desires. Stripped of their immortality, they wasted away in the dark, with only the trinket and flimsy material to pass the time. Egra Ata sat in a poorly lit corner of the tattered workbench. His focus was entirely devoted to an old worn piece of brass in his hands. The clangs of his hammer hitting the metal rang out and echoed through the dark hallway and passageways. He pounded the brass sheet relentlessly until the metal began to surrender its shape and bend to Egra's design. Suddenly, the hammer flew out of the mad elf's grasp. He examined his limp hand, trying to will it back into his control. Fury filled his heart as he watched the necrotic flesh fall off the bony hand. He didn't have much time. His other hand was weak, but still capable of grasping. He reached into his toolbox and removed a long, warped nail and stabbed it into the back of his paralyzed hands. He pushed the nail head until it broke through the skin and emerged on the other side of his palm. Immediately, pain shot through his arm. The thick and rigid tendons loosened up within his hand, giving him temporary use of his digits once more. The elf picked up his hammer and resumed molding the shape of the brass plate. With each impact on the brass, he poured his rage into this creation. How ironic that it would be the product of his tireless work, meant for the ones he hated the most. His deteriorating body was fading fast. He possessed just enough magical fuel to cast a curse into the object. When he was finished, his gift would be replaced with the other junk toys and cheap trinkets. It would make its way to them and find a child on Christmas morning. The curse would take hold and slowly begin tearing apart their lives. It'll channel their essence back to him and regenerate his immortality. The object would pass from child to another for centuries. He had just enough magic left to invoke this curse. He had once lived in the workshop above. Like every other elf before him, he loved nothing more than to create beautiful and wondrous toys and gizmos. However, in his heart, he wished that he would have kept some of those creations for himself. One day, his eyes fell upon a beautiful music box that his friend Delia had created. The music box was extraordinary, meant as a gift to a king's firstborn. It was magnificent. Created from oak, it bore an elaborate golden design on each side. When opened, the figurine of 3 children danced hand in hand to a beautiful lullaby around a gorgeous Christmas tree. He had never desired anything more in his life. It filled his heart with jealousy. He became resentful that this precious and rare treasure would go to some undeserving human infant. That little girl didn't deserve it. It should go to him, he thought. So under the cover of darkness, he slipped into the workshop and took the music box. Unable to sleep and anxious to put the finishing touches on his prized creation, he decided to return to the workshop. To his surprise and shock, he caught the elf attempting to steal the music box. He was enraged, for greed and thievery amongst elves were extremely offensive and not tolerated. He begged Talia not to report his transgression, but he was unmoved by the pleas, and turned to tell about his crimes. Desperate, he did the only thing there was for him to do. He grabbed a hammer and brought it down over his friend's head, over and over again, until no more life remained in the broken body. Despite his meticulous efforts to conceal his crime, he couldn't escape the sight and the wisdom of the old man. Humiliated and dishonored, the elf was banished from the workshop. His precious music box taken from him and given to the princess. Stripped of his immortality, he was cast into the cold and dark corridors of the other workshop to spend his remaining days, never to create a beautiful thing again. Seasons passed, his hatred for children grew, and it ate away at his sanity. He gritted his teeth knowing that the children of man were given everything and he had nothing. Hunched over his bench, he feverishly worked to complete his masterpiece. Staring down at an anvil, he hammered it into the brass. Each strike brought the faces of a child into his mind. It lives in warmth. It lives in warmth. The hammer formed the metal into a hollow cylinder. It stuffs its face with sweets and treats. Stumpy legs were welded into place. It gets everything it asks for from Mummy and Daddy. Malformed head and crooked ears took shape. It gets anything its little heart desires. The brass surface was scrubbed of debris and grime. It gets everything it wants. Small turquoise stones were affixed to the body. I hate it. One glimmering red ruby stone was bound to the left side of the figurine's head. I hate it. Finally, a second ruby was embedded into the surface of the other side. I hate them all. In the glow of the fire, he held up the brass figurine. It was a disturbing representation of a rabbit. Its body was a lattice of crisscross brass stripes, bejeweled with pale blue and turquoise stones at each intersection. The head was malformed and gave the impression of a dead thing, instead of a pleasant rabbit full of life. He placed this atrocious thing upon an open silver locket that contained a mirror, each side hinged. The rabbit figurine facing one of the mirrors, he carefully opened up a little vial of clear liquid. It was lymph. The lymph from an elf. It was a source of magic that flowed through their bodies like the blood from a second set of arteries, and it flowed to its own circulatory system that pumped by a very special second heart. Only a few tiny droplets fell out of the vial. It splashed onto the figurine and the mirror locket, illuminating them with a golden glow. He closed his eyes and he spoke the words of Woodworm in his elven tongue. The clear liquid turned black and stained the surface of both the rabbit statuette and the locket. The glow turned into a deep purple, then it slowly faded. Pleased with the outcome, he gently placed the cloth over the object without making eye contact to obscure it from sight, and he ever so carefully placed it in a small box decorated with holiday cheer. Finished with his work, he turned to leave, pushing past the corpses of several elves hanging upside down from the support beam of the other workshop. Their lifeless bodies drained completely of every last drop of magical lymph from their slit throats. If his calculations had been correct, he would have just enough magic to fuel the cursed object. The mad elf smiled and began to laugh. For the first time in a long time, Atea's heart filled with an anticipation of the approach of Christmas morning. The little girl sat in a large pile of torn wrapping paper from the many gifts she had found under the tree on the morning of December 22nd. Gabby woke earlier than everybody else, went downstairs and glared at the many presents that continuously tempted her. It was as if they teased and mocked her every time she looked at the colorful and beautiful wrapping paper. She would receive such a terrible scolding from her parents, but she couldn't wait any longer. At first, it was only going to be one gift that she opened. Then it became two, then another, and then another. Before she knew it, all of her presents had been opened. Despite getting everything she asked for, the desire for more had still not been satisfied. Gabby stood. A small gift next to the base of the tree caught her eye. She could have sworn that it wasn't there before. The wrapping paper was worn and yellowed with age, written in big words with a tag that said, "To Gabriella." It was like no other. She surely would have seen it by now. Puzzled, she removed the wrapping paper and found a box that contained a smaller, sealed box with a little scroll. She opened it up and she read, "Congratulations, lucky one. You are now the proud owner of Pepe the Rabbit. He loves you. He will be your best friend in the whole wide world. Pepe is a friend like no other. He will give you everything your heart desires. Pepe and Locket. Pepe the Rabbit and Locket." To be Pepe's friend, you must listen to him and never disobey the following instructions. You must place him on his locket facing the mirror. Never look him in the eyes. He is ever so bashful. He only likes to see through the mirror. You may ask anything of him 3 times. In 3 days' time, he will grant you everything you asked. Never look him in the eyes. It bears repeating. He does not like it and will be upset if you disobey this rule. Remember, lucky little boy or girl, Pepe loves you. He loves you more than anyone else in the whole wide world. He will make sure that no one can ever hurt you again. And if you love him, you will listen to him and do whatever he asks of you. Pepe loves you. Nobody can ever come between the two of you. Pepe loves you. Thank you guys for listening. I'm doing my best to get on a more I'm doing what I can. I'm sorry. I'm doing what I can, but that's the best I can do right now. I hope you enjoyed this little Christmassy. Oh, it was a little creepy, wasn't it? I hope everybody has a lovely Christmas weekend. I hope you enjoy it. You have drinky poos and good eats with the family and all that stuff. I will see you all in the next one, which I hope is soon. Can't promise anything, but I hope.